Assalamu alaikum. I want to talk about the question of can you touch the mushaf if you don't have wudu? And can somebody who's not a believer touch the mushaf? Can a woman that has her menstrual period touch the mushaf and read the ayat? And this is a question that comes up. In fact, scholars have had a disagreement because they understood the ayah in Surah Al-Waqi'ah somewhat differently. But I will say this: the answer to the question is you can definitely touch this kitab, and I will tell you why, regardless of whether you have wudu or you don't have wudu, and whether a woman has her menstrual period or if she doesn't. And I will tell you that the overwhelming majority of scholars understand that ayah 79 in Surah Al-Waqi'ah to mean that al-Mutahharun are the malaika, not al-Mutatahhirun, because the Kitab mentions al-Mutahharun more than once, and it's always used for the malaika, first of all. Second of all, there's a difference between al-Mutahharun and al-Mutatahhirun. Mutatahhirun means those that do cleanse themselves and do ablution, and this is completely different from al-Mutahharun. And if we go to Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and specifically the ayah 79, you will see that Allah says, إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ فِي كِتَابٍ مَكْنُونٍ لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَّهِّرُونَ لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين. So the first thing here is that you will see that the word that is used is al-Mutahharun, and those are the malaika. And here Allah is talking about when the Quran came from Him to the Lawh al-Mahfuz. So Lawh al-Mahfuz can only be touched by the malaika. You and I can't touch it, and those are the Mutahharun. What's my proof? If you don't have the proof, sometimes it's hard to make that argument, and quite frankly, a lot of the tafsir don't really use the argument that I'm going to give you now. Allah says in the next ayah, Tanzilun min Rabbil Alameen. You will find that in the kitab there's a difference between inzal and tanzil. Inzal with the alif, with the hamza, means that you make something available to somebody to understand and for them to realize it in their consciousness. So if you do balagh, like Rasul ﷺ, وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ, he just has to relay the message to all people. But if you're asked to do iblagh, then you have to go and tell each person. Here Allah says Tanzilun min Rabbil Alameen, which means that this is where it came outside the consciousness of humans, and therefore we are talking about Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. We're not talking about Al-Inzal, which you will find in most of the ayat when it talks about us receiving the kitab, for example. This way, you can compare the ayat. Allah says, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ فِي لَيْلَةِ الْقَدْرِ إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ فِي لَيْلَةٍ مُبَارَكَةٍ, and so on. So you see the difference? There's a difference between tanzil and inzal, and here we're talking about the tanzil, which is outside of our consciousness. That's why it's really important sometimes to understand the vocabulary in this mushaf, because it really can shed a lot of light on these meanings. And it's very practical because you also have to understand that this changes how you deal with this kitab. Because if you really can't read it unless you have wudu, you're going to restrict when you can read this kitab. And you're going to restrict when this poor woman who wants to read the kitab, and they tell her you can't read it because you have your menstrual period. That should not stop you, should not stop anybody, okay? The other thing that is very important, the Prophet ﷺ did not walk around with one of these. And by the way, if you see mine, I have a lot of post-its and bookmarks, because that's what Allah wants you to do. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. You're supposed to do tadabbur, means you really go back and forth and you get the ayat and you look at the dubur, means the back of the ayah, and you flip it and try to understand it and think about the different words. But what I want to say, Allah uses by the way, in the Mus'haf, the word for what we consider to be kitab in our day-to-day language, Allah uses the word qirtas. He doesn't even use the word kitab like we use it. Allah says, وَلَوْ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ كِتَابًا فِي قِرْطَاسٍ. So this shape of a book is called in the Quran is called qirtas. فَلَمَسُوهُ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ لَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ مُبِينٌ. This is in Surah Al-An'am, the ayah 7. And also in Surah Al-An'am, Allah says, تَجْعَلُونَهُ قَرَاطِيصَ تُبْدُونَهَا وَتُخْفُونَ كَثِيرًا. Because they used to have these, and they would hide some of them, talking about Bani Israel. So even today, you'll find that some people say, in some Arabic countries, they will say, بدي أكتب لك, and they don't mean that they're gonna uktub. They can just say something in a voice message, because it has a beginning and an end, and that's what a kitab is. Kitab min kataba, it's something that has a beginning and an end. Therefore, Allah sent His words in the form of dhikr, in the form of sigha sawti, in the form of something that we hear. The Prophet ﷺ did not bring this with him. Okay, Sayyidina Uthman put this format together. So it's really important that you read the Quran, this kitab, when you want, the Mus'haf. And if somebody is not a mu'min, how do you expect them to read the words of Allah if you don't give them the kitab to read it? Now, somebody said yesterday in our youth club that, they can only read the Arabic, the English or translated version, not the Arabic, because that's the words of Allah. Now, Allah is trying to bring people to this deen, and He sent them this message, and you want to deprive them of reading the message? Does that even make sense? Forget about, I guess, specifics of trying to analyze the ayat. That's not what Allah would want, because, they say that there's no hujjah without really, giving people notice. So people have to be on notice. So how do you give them notice? They're supposed to read this. So actually, you are encouraged to give this out to people. And we have to really use this, and not be shy and like paranoid, with the waswasa of, I can't touch the Quran here and I can't touch it here. And some people, I know people that would not take their phone, with them, to the bathroom, because they believe that because it has the Quran on it. I mean, your brain has the Quran on it. What does that mean? So, we have to be really reasonable and try to kind of make this deen taysir, and don't make it difficult for people to read the words of Allah. And it's important that during the month of Ramadan, we find ourselves, always, hopefully, with one of these trying to, do tadabbur. And most importantly, it's important to understand the ayat and to try to apply them to our lives, because if we don't apply them to our lives, then it really does not fulfill the murad, the intention of Allah's deen. So أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم, and I hope that you find this to be helpful. جزاكم الله خير على الاستماع. السلام عليكم.